What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of LUMIX Live. Today I've got a bit of a fun conversation. It's definitely a topic that is kind of right on the edge of what my wheelhouse is in comfort for photography and videography. But like we had said in the last couple of weeks, knowing that the LMAT Alliance is designed so that you can get any camera in the Alliance and know that all of the lenses available from Sigma, Leica, and Panasonic are all first party. Knowing that whole point, as I punch my microphone again, we had wanted to talk about some of the new lenses that came out, and in particular, we're talking about the 60 to 600 millimeter from Sigma on today's stream. So kind of bear with me a little bit on this, because we are going to be talking a little bit about, some wildlife photography, and I tried to do some videography, but my skills aren't fully there yet. We're going to talk about that in a later stream. So bear with me as I will give you the biggest, kind of heads up here that I am in no way a talented or skilled wildlife photographer, especially for bird and flight. Y'all that do that have way more skill and patience than I ever will. So hopefully what I can tell you about the lens and show you about the lens is relevant for your, maybe your decision making. If this is something you've been looking at wanting to pick up for the camera, hopefully some of the experience I can share with you helps guide in some of that information. But I did try to test a couple of things that I know are relatively challenging, especially if you're coming from our previous generation focusing system. Everything that I'm going to be showing on this stream in my Lightroom catalog is shot on the S5II, so utilizing the new PDAF system. And then we're also going to jump through, I have my camera hooked up, we're going to go through some of the settings in the camera, some of the ways that I used it, and then hopefully give you some of that kind of guidance in that side of this as well. So, before we jump into that, remind everybody about LUMIX Pro services. Here in the US, we have Red and Platinum. Red is free if you've picked up an S5 Mark II or any new camera recently, or you're looking to pick up a camera. Make sure to get yourself registered on LUMIX Pro services Red here in the US. Follow the QR code or check the link down in the description. That gets you your access to 3-year manufacturer warranty on all the new purchases. It also gets you access to the entire program, but if you're someone who likes having a little bit better level of service and support on the back end, we do have the Platinum tier available that gets you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. You get 20% off out of warranty repairs, so breaks, drops, things like that. Annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all the normal maintenance stuff that you would normally be doing before a season starts. And then you also get the membership hotline. So if you're someone who like me, prefers to speak to someone about challenges or issues that you may be facing in the field, you have access to that phone number that you can just reach out during normal business hours and speak to somebody to kind of troubleshoot what issues you may be having. If you are new to these streams, these are weekly broadcasts that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. They are interactive, so as you've seen a couple people do in here already, tag us in the chat using @LumixUSA. I think you can also use @Lumix Cameras. That'll just pop it up on my side, and then we can go through and I'll try to address all the questions that you have. And like every other stream that we've done, just because we're talking about long lenses and the S5 Mark II, if you have questions about other products or other areas of photography or videography, definitely feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll try to get to them on today's stream, but I will prioritize the questions that are predominantly around what it is that we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, let's see what kind of questions we've got so far here. Jonathan says, is the S5 Mark II 180 FPS as detailed as the GH6? It's relatively close. I still think the GH6 has better high speed as far as clarity and resolution. One of the benefits on the GH6 is that say you're using the 120 frames per second, like the 4K 120. That is, from independent users, that seems to be one of the highest detailed 4K 120s because it's actually using the full sensor, the full 25 megapixel sensor to downsample and then create that 4K 120. Where on full frame sensors, typically the hardware from a sensor level runs at a slower readout speed, so you're not really necessarily going to be doing anything that's oversampled. So is it as detailed as the GH6? It's going to be close-ish depending on what you want to do with the camera, but if you need high-speed shooting or higher frame rate recording, that's where a GH6 is definitely going to still be the better product at this time. So hopefully that answered that question for you, Jonathan. Let's see here. Michael, just got the S5 Mark II, and now I need a telephoto lens that works both inside low light and outside. Is the Panasonic 70-200 f2.8 the only option for me at the moment? If your reference point there for low light indoor and outdoor is a fast aperture, then pretty much at the moment you've got the 70-200 f2.8 from us. So that's our S Pro lens. Or you could do something like the Leica, but you're gonna go way higher in price. That's a 90-280. But that's also, if I remember correctly, that's a 2.8 to f4. So you kind of have to balance back and forth on that case. The 70-200 is going to give you the highest level of stability compatibility with our camera. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit because I did pre-record my initial thoughts and stuff while I was out in the field. So I wanted to make sure we show that as well. And then we'll come back and talk about the actual lens. So to my knowledge, I don't think Sigma's coming out or has a 70-200 2.8 in the L-mount series or any of the mirrorless line yet. So at the moment, yeah, the 70-200 2.8 from us is probably the best option. What you could do if you're coming from another lens mount system, Sigma does make the MC21 EF adapter that on an S5 Mark II. If you go out there and you look at some of the reviewers that have been working with EF mounted lenses, so Sigma's EF mount lenses, definitely take a look at some of their feedback. I only just got my MC21 back, so I can only now just start being able to talk about that, and that'll be another stream and conversation that we'll have. But that opens up a huge area of, that 70-200 and longer telephoto length. If you don't necessarily want to go with ours just yet, or if you're looking at an optic that's not currently available in L-mounts, definitely take a look at the MC21 with the S5 Mark II. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Michael. Andy, don't know if you can find, but Loner Gear wrote you an email a couple weeks ago. So yeah, as far as Loner Gear goes in the US, and Andy, I am still trying to kind of navigate that whole thing. The US side, or the North American side, we don't typically have a loaner program out there yet, but I'm looking to see what maybe we might be doing in the future or stuff like that. So I will try to keep you updated there. Flicks, are there any plans to bring pre-burst feature to the S5 Mark II? I know, given everyone's feedback, because we've taken out things like 4K photo, 6K photo, the pre-burst options and stuff like that, it's obviously something that we are going to be looking at. We are looking at currently. Part of one of the things that kind of happened was that, for the years and years that we've had things like 4K photo and pre-burst and the focus stacking stuff in the camera, there really wasn't much chatter online about it. So as we start to look and develop new things and, build new cameras, we start to look at, well, is this really something that the market's asking us for or they want? Can we devote those resources to do something else instead? Clearly, I think a lot of you have spoken that you miss the pre-burst functionality, at least that function side of 6K, 4K photo. It has been brought up to the engineers to kind of like say, okay, now that we've got PDAF down, we've got the system there, and obviously saying that we've got it down doesn't mean that we're done working on it. But now that that hurdle has been, kind of cleared, let's go and see what we can add in, more into these cameras and kind of work on. So is it a plan to bring it to the S5 Mark II? I honestly don't know at this point, but I do know that we have fed that information back up. I know Matt and I have both fed that information back up. And I think some of the others, I think Nick and some of the others have brought that up as well. So yeah, just keep asking. Let us know in the chat and stuff like that, and we'll always feed that over and help build the case for adding stuff like that into these kinds of cameras. So, FC says, I wonder why the term wildlife means photo of animals, but nowadays wildlife can mean people doing crazy things on the streets. Well, yeah, fair point. Following up from an old question, can the BGH1 use Ethernet with another LUMIX camera using USB to allow both cameras on LUMIX Tether app? When I have tested it in my setup, I was not able to get the USB camera and the Ethernet camera to pick up at the same time. However, I haven't had a chance to go back to that because I think the way I was testing it was flawed. And now we have the updated version of LUMIX Tether out and everything, so I have to recheck that, JC. I honestly just haven't had enough time to go back and check it. Primarily because now that we have the S5 Mark II, I've changed my my studio camera into that for the time being because I'm constantly trying to do stress testing and stuff and work on some of that stuff. So my box camera's been relegated off to the side for a little bit, but I will try to get back into that and see if I can get you some answers on that one. Eduardo, is it true the reports in the forum about an interval of half second for capturing photos after pressing the button in photo mode? No, that is not correct, or at least not completely correct. I have been troubleshooting some users out there that have been having different things attached to the camera and getting some slightly different results, but across the board, that's not anything that I'm seeing in the camera. So as we kind of go through that, you have to look at, well, is a person using an adapter? What kind of lens are they attached to it? Are they using a flash? What kind of flash is being attached to it? What mode is the camera in? Do they have anything else attached to it? As easy as it is online for one person's challenge to all of a sudden become this big, huge deal, we take a very methodical approach to actually look at that situation, determine all the variables that are on there, and work it through to see, okay, is there a problem, or is this something that is down to user error, in the sense that it's a combination that would have never really necessarily been tested for. And then that goes to our engineering team and our software team to look and say, okay, is this something we can shift and improve? From my personal experience, I have not had any situation where I've had the camera take any appreciable time to capture a photo. So yeah, those kinds of things, we are looking into them. We take every single, comment or challenge that someone has in the market. We do take them very seriously, especially when they're brought up through the proper channels and communicated to us. As a reminder, the Facebook groups, as nice as they are and as much as I try to be a part of them, those are not ways to actually let a brand know that you're having a problem with a camera. Half the time those groups are private, which means if I ever see it, it takes probably an hour to 2 hours to compile that information and try to get it over to the team. So if you post something there and never actually let us know about it through formal channels, just know that that's like one of the last areas that's going to get any information kind of filtered up and actually communicated into our teams. I try my best, but I can't always catch everybody's, and usually there's information spread all over the place. So that kind of stuff, if you have challenges like that, let us know here on the stream. Let us know in the comments. That's probably the best way to actually try to get something directly to us, because then you have a direct line of communication. Not saying don't talk on the forums, but just know that if you have an issue, it's going to be very hard for any manufacturer. This is not just us. Any manufacturer to actually be able to track down what could be causing that challenge for any particular user. JC says, can you prevent 4 channels of audio from recording on the LUMIX audio module on the GH6? I keep getting 4 when only mic is in. At the moment, nope, you get 4 channels. That's just the way the system is written right now. But that has been brought up to our engineers to see if there's something that could be changed there. And then I'll take one more question, and then we're going to jump into the lens, because I know a lot of people are here for the lens side of this conversation. This is more of a wide lens question, but some video users would love to be able to disable IBIS, leaving OIS on, or better, disable IBIS access Responsible for warping. This has been brought up. We have brought it into our team to kind of see, hey, if you're looking at the different stabilization effects, and when you go to different, fields of view, what, how can you counteract some of that motion? I think what everyone is noticing now is that now that we're into like ultra wide angle lenses and they're becoming more affordable and you're getting more options out there, you realize that anything up until recently, stabilization in cameras, especially in video, has been tuned for that 20 to 24 millimeter as the widest field of view that most people would use. Because usually wider than that, you're either putting it on a gimbal or, and this is traditional thought process. Usually anything wider than that, you're kind of either turning the stabilization off and using it on a gimbal, or you're shooting ultra wide and stabilization is not as important in ultra wide shooting. So by fixing one and really strengthening the stabilization in that 20 to 24 millimeter field of view without doing any kind of like cropping or other kind of trickery to make the system more stable, you start to notice that, well, because it's so powerful in this area, when you start to go to ultra wide, that's where you can get some wobbly corners. But all of that is being reviewed by the engineers. They look at every single thing and they say, well, if we try to fix A, what does it cause to B? That level of review. So it is being looked into. I have no updates as to whether or not it's going to happen anytime soon or if it even is possible to happen. But knowing that you guys are bringing these questions up, that's exactly what we need. It helps us bring this back into our engineering team. So, all right, so let's actually kind of jump into this lens here. So, Sigma was awesome and provided me a 60 to 600 millimeter for a relatively extended long period of time. So I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff on this. As a fan of some of the Sigma lenses myself, I love just being able to jump back and forth between using all of the f1.8 primes from LUMIX, and then being able to jump in like with my 105 millimeter macro that I love, and then now even into these ultra telephotos where they reach into areas where our lenses don't. So when I was given the opportunity to get this lens and play around with it, I decided to go out there and try to photograph in ways that I'm not really ever normally that comfortable with, and that's in birding and wildlife. So to kind of give you information as to what I think about this lens and some info about the lens, let's jump to the recorded conversation that I had earlier while I was actually still out in the field, and I had those kind of impressions first of mine while I was out there. So let's take a look at that. How's it going, everybody? This is Sean from LUMIX Live, and we are out here in the field taking a look at a new lens like I had promised we would do last week. That lens is the brand new 60 to 600 millimeter f4.5 to 6.3. This is the new addition for ultra telephoto shooters in the L-Mount Alliance set of cameras. So I came out here to downtown Austin, and I've got my S5 Mark II. I had it paired up with this new lens and decided to take my crack at some very amateur wildlife and birding photography. Fact that it being, fairly windy out today, there's not a ton of activity for the wildlife. So while this is not going to be a comprehensive kind of test on how the lens works for tracking, ultra fast, wildlife and stuff like that, which again, I'm not the best at that, kind of experience wise. So I wouldn't ever kind of claim to be the best at that. I wanted to at least come out here and show you guys how the lens works, how someone with very little experience in this kind of photography is able to make on with the product, while we're out here. And then I also wanted to talk about some of the cool things that this lens offers you that you probably, you may know, but if you're someone that's new to the L-Mount system, you may not actually know at this point. And one of those first things to actually kind of talk about is some features that this lens offers you. And that kind of biggest point here is that the 60 to 600 offers you one crazy range. You've got 60 millimeter out to 600 millimeters, so that's kind of an awesome setup. But it is a relatively large lens. Because of that, like anyone that's ever worked with ultra long lenses, you know that you can get lens creep. It's something that just kind of happens over time as you use these optics more and more. But Sigma's been very smart about how they designed this. They gave you the ability to lock the lens into the focal length. But as I found, which was something that I wasn't really expecting to see on this, is that if I go to any of the fixed points along the lens, so it goes 60, 80, 100, 120, a lot of the common focal lengths that you're probably going to be using on this lens, I can go to that point and then I can re-engage the lock when I'm actually at that point. And now the lens is basically locked at that particular field of view, so that while I'm using it, I don't have to worry about, if I tip my lens down, is it going to move? If I tip it up, is it going to move? I know that, okay, I am locked at that focal length that I wanted to be shooting at. So I found this actually to be very useful when I'm shooting on the wider end of this. So I had gone up over the weekend, and we're going to look at some of those photos as well. I had gone up over the weekend and done some automotive photography with this as well. So up my typical spot with the motorcycles, and did some long range, 600 millimeter shooting. I decided to try some 60 mil and also some zooming while photographing. We're going to talk about that in a minute as well. And I found that being able to lock my field of view actually became super, super helpful in those scenarios where I'm kind of, really just focusing on the framing of the shot when I know where I want the image to be and I know what kind of compression I want to have on it. So that's kind of the main point. The other one is you have these custom buttons all along the outside of it. You've got 3 of them on the lens. So you don't have one on when you're looking at the lens this way, you don't have one on the right side, but you have one on the top, left, and bottom. So if you're rotating the camera and you're going to be shooting vertical, you've got access to them very easily. But within the LUMIX system, you're able to actually program what these buttons do in our menus. So that actually makes it really useful for any of the kind of situations where you want to be able to tell the camera, okay, I want to override my focusing system. So this lets me prioritize, how I want to use the lens and use these custom buttons. Probably the coolest part about this, though, is that you're not just limited to lens functionality with this. I mean, for the most part it is. But it can also be a quick override for different autofocus modes, enabling and disabling things, and we'll take a look at that in the studio as to what you can actually customize on those buttons. So, as I said, wanted to talk about the zooming while focusing on this particular lens. Now, mind you, this is still, what my understanding is, this is still a pre-production or an early production since these are not shipping yet. So there may be some changes to this by the time the lens actually ships out and it's in your hands. But what I found is that in the photography side, zooming while focusing and actually creating a burst was not fully compatible at this point. I know from our lenses, from our 70-200, our 70 to, both of our 70-200s will be getting a firmware update to support that, and our 70-300 does now have a firmware update to support that. I would imagine that that's something that will be coming for this lens, considering my 24-70 does it already. But remember, this is a new lens, so while this is, definitely, the best one you can get, I would say, for this kind of range. As we get closer to this actually hitting the street, I'm going to keep an eye out for some firmware updates to see from this lens, and I know that I will be passing that kind of information back on to Sigma. So one of the other really cool things about a lens like this is that, obviously you have a number of controls along the barrel of this lens. You've got your AF/MF option, you've got your focus limiting option, so this is similar to what we can do in camera, but this gives you the actual hard switches to select the different ranges. And then you also have the optic stabilization system on this. You have on, 1, and 2 for this lens. Now that actually becomes very important with the LUMIX system. So as many have, kind of noticed recently, if you've started working with some of these longer lenses, we do have dual IS compatibility with Sigma's long telephoto optics. It's not the same level of compatibility that we have with our, first party or our branded LUMIX lenses, in that we have all of the operational information and the precision needed in our stabilization elements that are built onto the lens, as well as the paired optics sensor stabilization that we have on the body. What this means, though, is that you can go into the camera menu and 100% use a dual image stabilization solution when working with a lens like this, or the 150-600, or even the 100-400. You just go into the menu, go into the stabilization option, and where you would normally be able to select auto, normal, or off, you'll see that you'll have auto on, and then you'll still also be able to turn it off. But in the description that you get with it, it will tell you that you will use the lens stabilization to correct for up, down, left, right, and then the body stabilization controls most of the other parameters there. This basically what it will do is that it will disable the roll correction that the sensors can do. So while you're not getting the full capabilities there, you're still getting an incredibly capable stabilization system that is dual compatible with this lens on a camera like the S5 Mark II. Now, as basically the kind of probably the most important thing that people are asking about on this is, well, how's the focusing solution on it? You know, how does it work? Is it close to what we can get on our lenses, on our 70-200s or the 70-300? And I am happy to report that you are getting next to identical levels of performance with a lens like this on the S5 Mark II. Because it's part of the LMAT Alliance, because the system is designed based on a set of standards, you know that the stabilization and the focusing solution you get out of this is going to match very closely to what you get on a LUMIX branded lens. In the testing that I've done here, where I've got some of the birds and stuff that I'm photographing, I'm able to keep up with those subjects, whether I'm using the 30 frames per second electronic burst or whether I'm using the 7 frames per second mechanical burst, and it's been able to track pretty much everything that I pointed at. The thing that I will tell you, though, as we look at some of these pictures here, is that I am by no means a seasoned or good wildlife photographer. So while the system is fully capable to do everything that you would need it to do, you do need to be, you know, relatively skilled in this kind of shooting, especially when you're out at 600mm. But I'm super happy to report back that at 600mm, I'm able to lock focus right in. I'm able to jump between the different focus modes that the camera offers, whether it's zone, full area, one area plus, or even our new kind of refined one area that lets you actually go down to the PDAF pixel point. And in a mix of all of those different scenarios, for someone who's never done this kind of photography before, I was able to land some super awesome photos that at least I am super proud of. So we'll take a look at some of those in a moment. So other than that, that's really all I wanted to kind of talk about while we're out here, and we're gonna go back to the studio and actually talk more about this and answer some questions from you. So let's kick back to the studio. So yeah, those, you know, obviously that was a very kind of like just heavy overview of the lens and some of the firsthand experience with it. And like we said, it's interesting if you've never shot with long telephoto lenses. And again, I really want to make myself clear on this. I am not what I would consider skilled telephoto photographer or videographer. So my keeper rate is down to my inexperience and lack of tools available, like a Wimberley head and stuff like that for tracking focus, or for tracking with the camera. But what I found is that the lens has a ton of things to offer for anyone that wants to go ultra long telephoto. And again, this is in the full frame category. So with the particular lens, let's actually kind of jump over and take a look at some of the photos that I took, because I want to highlight some of the things that our system was able to do that is new to my experience, and hopefully, you know, kind of gives you guys some good information with some of this. So we're looking at my Lightroom catalog here, and for those that don't know, let me go back to main camera. For those that don't know, if you are an Adobe user and you have an S5 Mark II, make sure that you update to Camera Raw 15.2. So that is one of the most recent updates that they did. Because now Lightroom supports, or Adobe Camera Raw supports, our RAW files already. So, woo! We can actually start playing around with RAW files. So, anyway. Yeah, so with this lens, one of the things that really becomes beneficial when people ask, well, what's the difference between a regular S5 and an S5 Mark II when it comes to wildlife and birding? Well, the phase detect is surprisingly, even for a lot of us that have learned to make do and work with the DFD system, the PDAF just gives you that much higher level of confidence when you're actually in the field and knowing that you can trust the detection modes that the camera offers. So for this first grouping of photos that I got here, I used the full system's animal detection using the full area, and then I would jump between either zone or one area, depending on just kind of trying to figure out, what worked best. When it wasn't able to detect a subject, could I force it to detect a subject by focusing in closer with the points, I mean. And what I found here is that, we're looking at, and we'll take this a second to load in here, this grouping of shots here, these are at 600 millimeter, they're wide open at f6.3, and pretty much this entire range of photos, while in continuous focus, was able to still maintain, detect, and pick up and lock on to this little bird while it was in the reeds here almost the entire time. There are certain times where, it may have gone a little bit as, the subject moves or as I moved, which introduces more camera shake, even though I'm shooting at 2500th of a second. But what I found it to be just super reliable and able to pick that subject out. This was a tiny bird, to pick it out and actually be able to give me this detail. Now, for any of those that want to know, I have done some editing to this. I don't touch any of the texture clarity or any of the sharpness, stuff like that. This is right out of the camera. And then also for everybody as well, this was shot on, I had a tripod with me on it, just not a typical Wimberley style head. So this is just my Peak Design ball head, loosened up so I could at least keep myself stable. But, yeah, it was able to maintain and keep the focus on the point I needed it the entire time. And this was being able to use the different AF modes that the camera has in photography. And we're going to talk about those when we actually jump in and look at the camera settings here. But again, as we say, as I said here, it pretty much, even when the eye of the animal is obscured, even when it becomes harder to actually determine that that bird is there, it's able to kind of keep focus. Now, when this subject moved, I'll be fully transparent with you, it lost focus really quickly there for a second, but then it was very quick to jump right back into that as I was shooting these frames, just firing them off throughout that frame rate there. Even when you start to get more, kind of buried in behind things. So when we keep going a little bit further, and you'll see that I have a huge selection of these photos here, all of the same thing, just running full on there. We went to one where you've got a little bit harsher backlight on the scene. Now this is properly exposed up, so if I go back and I reset this, you'll see that this is relatively underexposed, and we're still able to actually keep that bird in focus, even though its body is mostly obscured through the reeds that are here. And we kept it all the way through. So if I go, the one that I wanted to take a look at, even here again, when it's fully looking away, moving through, getting more covered by those reeds, back into where you can see it, the lens and the focusing system were able to actually keep locked on this target and not cause me that challenge where when it just doesn't see the subject, it would just say, okay, hey, there's some reeds here, let me focus on those. This was able to actually stay locked on this target and keep that rate for me, so that whether or not I used electronic shutter or mechanical shutter, I was able to know that, okay, I've got those photos, they're in focus. Let's take a look at some of those questions here, because I saw some other questions come in here. Where was that one question? Nick asks, how loud is the zoom on the 60 to 600 millimeter for video? That's a good question. Even in the photography side, this is something that you can notice depending on the lens that you're working with. The 60 to 600, since it's using a linear motor now, it is ultra it's ultra silent. Especially if you're outdoors. The ambient sound, it's any noise that the lens, or any lens honestly, would be making is going to be below whatever your noise floor is anyway. But this lens was super quiet, super fast, super quiet, and they're using a newer motor in it, so it paired incredibly nice on the S5 Mark II. Let's see here. Where was that other question came in? FC at 600mm, will hot, hands on top or hands on bottom be better for stability when shooting portraits? I am a firm believer that whenever you are shooting with pretty much any lens, even if you're, doing more telephoto stuff, it's better to cradle the lens under your hand. So whether you're shooting with a vertical grip or you're doing an over the top with the camera, it's better to support the lens underneath, because you can rest your arm and the weight into your body. If you're ever someone that is photographing and you put your hand over top of the lens, you have to remember that your arms are going to get tired, so you're going to actually start pulling the lens down, which means you're going to be fighting it to stay back up. And in cases like that, you're going to be fighting your stabilization system anyway, too. So across the board, I would highly recommend that you do hand under bottom of a lens, of any lens across the board. It's just typically going to give you a better stable position there. Let's see here. Dennis says, speaking of Lightroom in the S5II, is the forced strong noise reduction still there that shows up with Silky Pics? No, I found that Silky Pics, which I've tried to make very clear for a lot of people, Silky Pics has very aggressive smoothing that it does in the still images. Lightroom tends to be, in my opinion, much less aggressive. It still can be aggressive, but I find that the defaults out of Lightroom tend to be better than most of the other programs. I haven't tried Capture One or any of the others because their raw support's not there yet. But yeah, so with this, Lightroom seems to me to be actually really solid when it comes to general just being able to shoot. You get a really good baseline. As long as you make sure that, if I go back in here, as long as you make sure that you're using the camera profiles and not Adobe Standard, because Adobe Standard, I'm sorry if anyone in the chat works for Adobe, but Adobe Standard color is kind of garbage. Let's see here. Happy S5II owner here, but any of you guys had the charger in the package? Because I don't. Yeah, the S5 Mark II does not ship with the charging cradle anymore. It's the power brick and a USB cable. Pro tip, go to the zoo next time. The animals are easy to photograph. Yeah, that definitely would work. I love super zooms personally. It's something like a 12 to 200 in the works, perhaps. More of a suggestion, really. I know you can't comment on future plans. Well, we have put out a new kind of like roadmap that talks that there is a long-range lens coming, or a wide. Long-range lens makes it sound like it's an ultra telephoto, but a lens that will cover a wide range of focal lengths. We don't have details to share about what focal lengths those are, or when, or price, or anything like that. But we are looking at an optic like that. Flick says, does the 30 frames per second electronic shutter mode still use phase detect? Yes, it does. 100%. I can confirm that. If you read that it doesn't elsewhere, they're wrong. And some LUMIX S Super Teles would be nice as well. So hopefully what you see so far is that, while yes, I think a lot of people would like to see a LUMIX S Super Telephoto lens, we don't necessarily have to, because you've got the Sigma series. Yeah. Let's see here. Thought it was something going on with the raw file itself. I saw quite a few comparisons with the S5II look denoised into oblivion compared to others. Yeah, that was strictly just on Silky Pics, Dennis. Anyone that's still working with Silky Pics, if you're waiting for like Capture One or On One or any of those other programs that you like to use to edit your raw files, pro tip for Silky Pics: go to the noise reduction panel and take the smoothing slide, or the smoothness slide, and just drag that all the way down to 0. Just take that completely out. The reason for that is if you do that, just let the system not denoise or smoothen the image at all. You can do much better noise reduction in programs like Topaz or Lightroom or Photoshop or really almost any other program. There are a lot of things that SilkyPix is very powerful at, if that's what you've learned to edit on. Noise reduction is not one of my preferred, so I recommend, if you're still using SilkyPix, waiting for your preferred raw editing software to be updated. One, either jump onto Adobe for the time being, or if you're using SilkyPix, just take that smoothness slider and drag it all the way down. Cool. So, Alan says, the super zoom you just mentioned, is that for L mount or Micro Four Thirds? We have announced, or we've shown in our future lens roadmap that for the S series, this would be a not exactly sure what focal lengths it's going to be, but it is a wide focal range lens for S series. So that'd be L mount. Let's see here. Okay, cool. So, when we looked at here again, some of the things to mention here is, again, as someone who's not experienced with this is where I had learned firsthand that subject detection modes are great, but when you start to go into scenarios where maybe the bulk of that subject is being obscured to where a system may not necessarily be able to tell that it's an animal because its face might be mostly obscured, or it's the way it's positioned maybe kind of obscuring the system to be able to tell what it is, you have ways to kind of override this. And I'm going to show that in the S5 Mark II in a minute. But what I was able to do with this particular shot is, as I was going through taking some of these shots, I noticed that the first two that I took were close to focused, but it was just ever so slightly out, and I wasn't getting a subject detection box on here. So what I did is I quickly just jumped into the camera menu, and I'll show you this, and I changed it, instead of using the full area, to using a small zone area, which when I did that, gave me the detection box around my subject. So now I was able to actually take a look here, go through these photos, and see that, okay, now the bird is actually being picked up. It's able to tell where this is, it's locking in focus, it's giving me the images that I want, even though it was primarily obscured through the reeds again here. And then even into where, again, you're seeing that the bulk of this animal is obscured through the reeds. But by changing some of the modes and tweaking some of the settings, I was able to get in here and it would lock focus right on the face. So then I was able to get it, lock as the bird's moving. I was a little bit slow of a shutter speed here. And I was able to then know, okay, cool, I've got this image, go through a little bit, locked right on. Now, we talked about my lack of experience in wildlife or bird in flight photography. So if you are a bird in flight photographer, hopefully what I'm about to tell you is useful for you, because my images are not going to be the best, and I'm not ashamed to show them to you. My point here being that if you've never shot this before, it is possible. It's just going to come down to practice, right? So I was able to follow this seagull through these frames here using the zone area and the animal detection mode on the camera. What this allows it to do is basically tell the camera, use this area to focus with, use subject detection within that area. But if you don't have a subject, only use the points that are within this box. Where if you use the full area, it's going to say, okay, I don't know what subject you want me to focus on, so I'm going to default to whatever my basic parameters would be, which could have the thing focus on the reeds in the foreground. It could have you focus on the background, because you're not telling it, a parameter to stay in. So in this case, knowing that I didn't want the system to jump to, say, the pelicans here, I want it to stay in this area as I'm going through, I'm able to have this be in continuous focus. I was using mechanical shutter for this in this particular set of testing. And I was able to consistently be able to actually track this seagull. And you'll see that it's able to keep up. It knows that it's in there. It's in focus. This is really far away. So again, we're at 600 millimeter and I'm shooting relatively low to the ground. And I'm shooting over the open water, so you're going to have some distortion because of heat, and this is under direct sun. But I was comfortably able to just keep the camera in focus the entire way, all the way through. And for someone who's never had experience with this, I think you've got an incredible tool to get yourself into this kind of photography and videography. Now, for video, I wasn't able to do a lot as far as the video side goes, and I realized that I'm on me, not on the screen there, so I'll go back. As you can see, I was able to actually keep these in focus the entire time. But as far as video goes, because I didn't have really enough time or enough of a setup to do it, I can say confidently that it actually did a really good job for what I would want it to do, but we will be doing some more in-depth videography testing with it, and there already is a really great video out there from mountain bikers on the S5 Mark II that I'll try to remember to link down in the description if I can remember where to find it, the English version of it, that shows you the AF performance of this lens attached to the S5 Mark II for video shooters. But yeah, ultimately, this lens, if you have the skill or the experience in shooting long telephoto, wildlife, and bird in flight, the camera's going to be able to keep up with you. As long as you just kind of get yourself used to the weight, the size, the way that the camera just works in general. And then again, even into smaller subjects, again, 600 millimeter, we're able to get it locked right on. Still, again, locked right on, nice and sharp in the eyes there. And then even when shooting at kind of obscure angles. The last thing I wanted to talk about on this before we jump in and actually start looking at the camera is when everyone was asking about, the RAW format and stuff like that, and focusing on a strong backlight. So a scenario where you've got a very bright field behind your subject, and then you're trying to, actually make that work. I was able to get a couple of examples here where this is a incredibly bright blue sky, and obviously the system has basically just set it up that the exposure meter's saying, well, that's actually going to be kind of gray because that's what exposure meters do. And I was still able, the AF system is still able to lock right on the target that I want it to, even when it's, maybe not ultra dimly lit, or when it is legitimately a silhouette against a background. The system was able to lock on focus. And the reason I have these images up here is just to show you really simply how much flexibility you actually have in these RAW files on the S5 Mark II. So something as simple as just tweaking some of the exposure, bring my contrast up a little bit more, I'm able to take that image and go right from, I'll do this in split view, before and after there. Come on. Nope. There we go. What did I do? I completely screwed that up. There we go. I'm able to come in here and you see that you actually have a lot of detail that is still able to be pulled out of this image, even when that full image was basically fully backlit. So the dynamic range is crazy there. You get a lot of really good flexibility with this camera now. Even when we come in and I just do something as simple as this. Now, this is not how I would normally edit files, but you kind of get the point. You're able to pull back a ton of detail on this, even when you've got backlit scenes, and know that the camera and the lens combination is still going to get you a really sharp result right out of, the RAW files that you have on here. So, with that, let's see what other if there were any other questions in here before we kind of go in there. Before we look at the actual camera. The Super Zoom, if you want great color in Adobe Lightroom, avoid Adobe Color, use either Panasonic Standard, Landscape, or Cine D. Yep, 100%, Dennis is right. Or use some of your own, because you can load in stuff here if you like. This is one of the Kodachrome profiles, actually from photographer and YouTuber Ted Forbes. I played around with checking out some of the profiles that he has. Cool little tip, if you're looking at those profiles, you want to go back to the old film stuff, definitely check out Ted Forbes and the Art of Photography. He's got a really cool set of Kodak and Fujifilm emulations and looks that if you're someone who grew up photographing with that stuff, you can apply them here. You can also set them up to work on your camera as well. But anyway, yeah, you just have a ton of that flexibility in these RAW files. Now, one thing that I tried to do with this is tried to do some of the automotive photography, like I had mentioned earlier before. And one thing I can tell you is automotive photography with a 600mm lens, when you don't have the ultra long range that you would typically want for 600mm, is a bit challenging, especially when it was the first, kind of the first chance that you actually take the lens out and go try to do something. But for those that do want to look, this is 600mm, thousandth of a second, wide open at 6.3 on the S5 Mark II, and this was shot, just kind of basic handheld, trying to get used to that long telephoto, and using human and subject detection, which can be a little challenging when you're doing something like motorsports, especially on a sport bike. I was still able to get the focusing in here pretty close to where if I go in for however I would want to use this photo, it's more than sharp enough for the things that I would actually want to do with it. The challenge that you run into with this really is more the actual shutter speed, right? You want to be able to be firing at a fast enough shutter speed that that image, is going to be, kind of tack sharp for that subject that you're going for. Being able to kind of play around, use this lens, know that you've got from ultra wide angle to ultra telephoto, makes it a really, really fun lens to work with. And again, you've got some crazy dynamic range that you can still pull out from these particular images. You'll see even through here, if I reset this image, you see how dark that was as this guy's coming around the corner here. And this was shot at about 320mm. And yeah, you are just able to pull out a ton of this kind of detail with it. Now, obviously, he's in full shadow there, so you get a little bit of that shift there. But yeah, super crisp, nice and sharp. Even if I take the shadows and I boost them all the way up, now you're getting into that point where that part was so far underexposed. Bring it back a little bit. But the lens kept up. The lens is able to track, to lock on target, to give you what you need out of it as long as you actually work with that lens. And as I realize, I'm actually not sharing the photos. Thank you. There you go. This is the one that I'm looking at. So if I reset this image, you'll see... Sorry, everybody, as I just realized I didn't change the scene back. We've got an image here, 320mm. 320mm, just using the standard tracking focus. This is with mechanical burst on the camera. And if I just kind of come through here and do some quick edits here, just to bring up some of the... just to show you kind of how much dynamic range this camera actually has. So bring my shadows back down a little bit. Let's not clip the reds. We're not clipping on the highlights at all. And yeah, you see that I've got a nice tack sharp in focus image, and this is shot at what would be considered wide open at 320mm, so that's 5.9. And yeah, it just performed. The phase detect AF worked, flawlessly for this for me. There are obviously times where, as you're kind of going through this and as you start to work with a long telephoto lens, you start to learn where your kind of challenges are, right? Learn what your experience levels are. It's just a lot of fun to work with, and now you have this long ultra telephoto option available for you. Let's see some of the comments here. It looks like some of these shots used live custom LUTs. Some of them have, but a lot of it's really just more down to the editing that I like to do. Can I separate the focus from the shutter button even in AFC mode and set it onto the back button, or can I only do that in AFS? You can 100% set the camera up to do back button focus, and I'll show you in a moment. So the S5 Mark II, I'm using a Sigma Series 24 to 70 2.8, and I feel the eye focus doesn't pick up. How can I improve this? So depending, it depends on, one, make sure the firmware is updated on your 24 to 70. I don't have any issues with face and eye detect on the 24 to 70 2.8. when you start getting into the ultra fast lenses is where you can run into some challenges, but usually not too much. But yeah, the probably first thing is check and make sure that the firmwares are all up to date on the lens. Make sure that, are you using full area, or using zone, one area plus? Just double check your different focus modes. A lot of that can kind of help you narrow down ways to get the system to make sure that, you're maximizing the use of it. But yeah, the other thing is just check the subject too, that you're trying to focus on. Are they wearing glasses? Is the face partially obscured? Stuff like that can all come into play as to whether or not face and eye can actually set up. Let's see here. Martin says, for photos, does the picture profile selected affect dynamic range on JPEG only, or also raw images? I do mainly videos, so excuse me if this is a silly question. No, it's an incredibly valid question. Color profiles that you choose in a camera for stills capture, outside of Vlog and the Cine-like profiles, and technically hybrid log gamma, have no effect on dynamic range or processing to that actual raw file. When you shoot in Vlog, hybrid log gamma, or Cine-like D or V2, D2 or V2, they change what the calibration is for things like ISO and noise and stuff like that. That will get carried over to the raw file because the raw software has to know how to interpret that profile. Modern setups here, like Lightroom, if you shoot in Vlog, which if you photograph in RAW, do not shoot in Vlog. It's pointless. If you are shooting in RAW and you decide to shoot in Vlog, Lightroom now has Vlog as a mapped profile for still shooting. It doesn't give you any benefit. You actually get less dynamic range from what I've played around with, because raw still files have infinitely more. Vlog is designed to compress dynamic range in to then be spread back out over a 10 to 12-bit file. You're working with 14-bit raw files here. You just have way more flexibility with a regular raw file. I think it's Harry says, does Phase AF work in any video mode? Works in most video modes. Does Phase AF work in any photo mode? Works in all photo modes. Is there a firmware update for the S5 Mark II? Which is the best mode to go with? There is no firmware update for the S5 Mark II yet. Still on 1.0. But yeah, you would just want to check the lens firmware updates just to make sure you've got that kind of stuff there. Okay, cool. So let's actually, last thing we're going to... How's it going, everybody? That was the wrong one to click on. We're going to click on this one. So I have the 60-600 attached here, and you'll see that I've got the system set up to, kind of show you a couple of things that we talked about. And one of those is the image stabilization. So on the S5 Mark II, when I'm working here with the Sigma 60-600, if I go into the stabilization mode, you'll see a new option here called Body IS and Lens OIS. What this does on these lenses, so on the Sigma lenses, allows me to come in here and say, I want body stabilization only. This means that it's going to use up, down, left, right, and rotational movements are all done by the camera. So it disables the lens stabilization. Or I can do lens stabilization. This will let the lens correct for up, down, left, right movement, so that's corrected by the lens, but then the camera body or the in-body stabilization solution is going to correct for roll of that image. So when I said in that video that we have dual IS, we do have dual IS with the Sigma lenses. You have to tell it which one you want to work with, whether you want the lens or the body, and then you kind of play around there. But then also, next step on top of that is that the camera system also has a totally different choice when it comes to lenses like the Sigma 60-600, because you also have mode 1 and mode 2 on the lens itself. Now, you would want to refer to the user manual on these lenses because it will tell you when you should use mode 1 and mode 2 on the lens, because that will also affect how your stabilization works on this lens when paired with both the camera and the lens stabilization for dual. So yeah, you want to play around with this. It has a pretty solid option here for you, especially when you're doing dual stabilization setups here. Let's see here. What are the questions? Metabone says no plans at the moment. Okay. Real-time LUTs for JPEG files processed in 10-bit. Or would I need to worry about banning artifacts when using Vlog with real-time LUT for pictures? Even in the photo side, I still, even with real-time LUT, you have to remember that JPEG processed images are 8-bit. They are not 10-bit. So you may get banding because it's going to end up being an 8-bit file, as far as a JPEG is concerned. So yeah, it's still early times. I think there's still a lot of playing around with it as to make sure what, kind of works best for it. Can I fit a battery grip? There is a model where I can insert 3 batteries, 1 and 2 in the grip. Well, the battery grip, the formal battery grip is the same as the S5, the original one. I do not trust and cannot recommend at all any third-party battery charger, or not battery charger, any third-party battery grip. I have seen multiple cameras actually get fried because of faulty wiring in third-party grips that overcurrent the system. So if you decide to do those, use at your own risk. You've been warned. Let's see here. Okay. One of the other things that we wanted to take a look at here. So we talked about that image stabilization, but while I was out in the field, one of the other things that, especially in the photography side, to keep in mind when you're working with the camera is that in the photography side of the AF settings, we have multiple different sets that are available by default in this. So you have here that you have set 1, set 2, set 3, and set 4. These are the default profiles for AF custom settings in the S5 Mark II. And this is the same for the other cameras as well. Set 1 is how your camera is actually programmed out of the box. And I will reset this because I was playing around. Out of the box, your camera is going to be set to 0, 0, plus 1 if you're in the photography side. So that means 0 AF sensitivity. So it's going to be neutral switching sensitivity, and then motion prediction is +1, and that is the algorithm that it uses to determine, hey, this subject's going to move, so I should follow them. You also have the descriptions there underneath. You'll see that it says versatile and basic settings. So these are for you just take the camera, go, set, you're fine, cool. Set 2 let me just make sure that I reset these because I have been playing around with them a lot. Okay, set 2 is +1 sensitivity, -1 switching sensitivity, and we give you now examples as to when these would be kind of a good choice for your type of shooting. Set 2 says that when the situation where the subject is moving at a constant speed in one direction, so think trains, planes, cars, stuff like that, you know that speed is not necessarily going to be changing that often, so you can go with a setup like this. Gives you a little bit more responsive AF sensitivity. It stays more locked on. So the AF switching sensitivity is in reference to when you're using full area mode only. And this is what allows the system to say, hey, you passed behind a tree. Don't switch to that tree. Stay on the original subject that I was working on. And then motion prediction goes down to 0 because it's constant. You know that object's moving at a constant speed. And then when we go to set 3, you've got AF sensitivity down to -1, so it's going to stay more locked on, so it's going to stay into that target. Your +1 responsive is that it's now going to say, like, okay, maybe I will switch subjects a little bit more, and then your motion prediction is up much higher as well. So you have this different setup here, and as you can see, this is for objects that are moving randomly, and where there may be other objects in the scene where you know that the system needs to be able to respond very fast. You need to jump between different subjects, jump between different targets. Set 3 gives you that. Then when you go to set 4, you get really what I tend to use primarily here, and that is what is rated more for car racing, motocross, and that's just really where your subject speed is going to be changing significantly. So I correlate this that from those birding images that I showed, if you're going to be photographing birds, motorsports, motocross, stuff like that, have the camera set up in set 4 as the default, because that's going to give you the motion prediction, The switching sensitivity sets it so that it can move quick to the subject point. And then you can play around with AF sensitivity as well, because each of these can be customized to your particular standard there. But ultimately, try these right out of the box, see what works best for your type of shooting, and you'll have a really good base to work with moving forward. All right, cool. So let's see what we've got here. Flix, why is it not possible to have full dual IS with non-LUMIX lenses? Is that not part of the L-mount protocol? Good, very, very good question. Technically, from my understanding, the stabilization side is not fully part of the protocol, to my understanding, because everyone builds that part a little bit different. However, the information is there. What you end up running into with the different lenses and the different cameras is what level of precision are you using for the hardware that's in the lens or in the camera. Because we develop everything with a very specific, kind of concept in mind, we want stability and we want it in, as many of our lenses and camera combinations as we can. And we have a different philosophy when it comes to what lenses need stabilizers and which lenses don't need stabilizers. That's where you'll see some of the little bit of a difference there. What I can say, though, is that in the L mount, you're getting levels, like basically the best level of compatibility that you can get based on the hardware that is being used between the different manufacturers based on the standard. So again, that's why, like with the Sigma 60 to 600 here, you still do get dual image stabilization. The paired solution for this is just that you're going to use the optical stabilization for vertical and horizontal shift, and then the camera's just going to handle roll for it. So that gives you the best kind of balance out of it. It's a matter of whether or not we have the information in the lens, whether the lens has the motors that can control those different aspects for the stabilization elements. Let's see here. We can show that one. Cool. Let's see. What else do we have here? Nick Driftwood says, has the Adobe color space gone in camera color space settings? I forget. I know I'm a little backed up on some of those questions, but what Nick, I believe what you're talking about is under the settings options? No, it's under the camera options. So you can go into these cameras and tell it to shoot at a different color profile. I just can never remember where that actually is. Color space. So for still shooting, you can shoot in Adobe RGB or sRGB for stills. So this gives you that option to be able to say, hey, I want to shoot Adobe color space, or I want to shoot sRGB. Remember that if you are taking an image in JPEG and you capture it in Adobe color space and you view it in a monitor or in a program that does not know how to display Adobe color space or can't display Adobe color space, your image is going to look really messed up. You'll also be able to tell on your file names as to which one you've shot it in. If you are in sRGB color space, you will have a P as a prefix for your image. So if you ever look at the file names, it'll say PANA, P-A-N-A, and then a number. If you capture in Adobe Adobe RGB, it'll be an underscore ANA camera number. So little tidbit there for being able to tell quickly file names, which ones you've got. Let's see here. Don't forget sRGB is very close to 709. Really need to get the cameras to do some testing. Now I'm kind of clueless. I know basically identical with different gammas, 2.2 and 2.4. There are some problems with the grip functionality in the S5 Mark II. Are there? I have not heard of any problems with the S5 Mark II and the grip. If there are, let us know what they are. That kind of helps us determine. Let's see here. Keep an Adobe RGB if you're going with a modern P3 screen to make use of the wider color space. Very true and correct, but I also would counter a lot of that too, is depending on where you're sending these files. You also have to remember delivery. Vast majority of people that are not in our world don't necessarily have, P3, color space monitors. A lot of them have monitors that are barely able to reach sRGB. full sRGB. So just kind of keep that in mind with some of this stuff. It's great to think of, we want everything to be in the most, grandiose color that you can possibly get in widest range. But ultimately, if you're sharing photos to other people, remember that not everyone has the same level. Like, I edit and I work on an LG C1 48-inch OLED display for my daily desktop computer here. Very few people are actually going to be using that or being able to see the colors that I represent off this. So that's why I have this 55-inch TCL TV that I have plugged in over here. Much cheaper display. And yeah. Nick was saying, was that color space function just shown on the S5 Mark II? Yes, it was. Let's see here. Is the optic quality and AF performance of the 60-600 the same as that of the 150-600? In my limited experience of the 150-600, I had it for a little bit of time. I would definitely say that the 60-600 is performing better. Excuse me. Jeez, couldn't get to the mute fast enough. Let's see here. Flix, thank you for answering all my questions so far. I have one last. Can I program a button on the S5 Mark II to activate a specific AF set? Would be very helpful to quick switch in the field. Not necessarily the AF set for being able to jump back in and say, hey, I want to change this to set 4. But I believe you can come in and I think you can. Be under AF custom settings. So what you can do is you can program one of the buttons to basically, when I click on this, it brings you right to the page. So that can let you be able to just kind of jump in, go right to the page instead of having to dig through the menus. Ironically, I know I was watching the DP review video that Jordan put up, which I always love when Jordan puts those videos out. Because there are a lot of good ideas that come out, and a lot of times, it gives us some things to look at and see, is this even possible? But what is nice is that in direct response to their video about being able to change customizations, yeah, we can be one custom function button away from the menu here to be able to jump through. So it is doable, but yeah. Let's see here. Sacred says, I'm watching this on a 1977 black and white CRT TV. Nice. How's the picture? Late to the stream, so you may have covered this. Are there any good tips for adapting long, wide primes like 600mm f4 from DSLRs? Yeah, probably one of the best things to do is if you are coming from a DSLR and you're looking at the S5 Mark II, pick up an MC21, the EF to L mount adapter. That will get you compatibility with a very large number of EF mount lenses. Obviously, we talk about the Sigma EF mount, but it's an EF converter for it. So check some of the YouTuber reviews out there of people using EF mount lenses through that adapter on the S5 Mark II. And know that you've got some good options for lenses that may or may not exist in the L mount. It can be a good way to get something like those more exotic, ultra fast lenses. I haven't tested many of them, as you've seen from some of the photos and stuff that I've shown here. I am not a particularly good long telephoto lens shooter. 200mm is about my max that I'm comfortable with. But yeah, you get huge access to a ton of different lenses out there. Someone recently brought up the suggestion for manufacturers to let focus ring adjust AF speed. Let me answer this question really quick first. Does the air vent slash water... Wow. I think the first time the question got asked, it was easier for me to understand. Where was that question? Despite the S5 Mark II having the vents on the top for the cooling solution, it is still weather and dust resistant. So you do not have to worry about dust or splash resistance or any kind of challenge like that with the S5 Mark II. So yeah. Let's see here. Someone recently brought up the suggestion for manufacturers to let the focus ring adjust AF speed. Alan, yeah, I did see that. That was that DP review video that posted, I think, yesterday. I like the idea. for anyone who cares what my opinion is on it. I like the idea, however, I see one major flaw in it. If you have your manual focus ring set while you're in continuous focus, you would need a way to lock that big dial from being able to be moved. If you are using any of the lenses and you're running gun and you've got, your hand on it because you're kind of stabilizing it, having this as an open input for any kind of setting that's going to adjust AF speed or sensitivity or anything like that is a basically a guaranteed situation of people calling in to camera manufacturer call centers saying, why is my system not working? Only to find that the reason it's not working is because while you're using it, you may not realize that you're bumping this ring ever so slightly. So the challenge would be that you'd have to find a way to do something like that, but then also have to add another step in between of it anyway, that has this be able to be disabled on the fly. It wouldn't be able to be an automatic selection. So at that point, it's the same as what we just showed, that if I'm in here, I just programmed the one button to go right into that menu, and I can change my core settings on the fly. So, let's see here. How to assign the functions, functions of the buttons on the grip, because they work differently on the body and differently on the grip. I believe on that, and actually I can double check with Matt Fraser, who I see is in the chat. Matt, if you could double check this for me, or I will call you after the stream to check this. Like any of our cameras, you can just press and hold a button. As I realize again, I'm not on the camera. You can just press and hold the button you want to assign, and then go through and assign it. That way, you don't have to necessarily go through the menu. But yeah, we can double check and kind of go through that too. Any news on destination card slot settings for the GH6? We keep missing the shots. Honestly, a change like that, Martin, it's not going to be something that's ever going to get done super quick. It's been brought up to them. As soon as I can get an update for you, I'll get you an update on the stream. But yeah, something like that's not going to be a very quick, immediate change, because that's a fundamental change to the way the file writing system is. Okay. Well, I think looking at the chat here, I think we've got pretty good coverage on the questions. So, yeah, cool. I want to, okay, JC, request, start and stop all cameras connected via the Tether app. You can do that, JC. You have to open up the cameras window, and then what you would do is select, I might be able to actually do it and show you. What you would do is select that all the visible cameras. So if I go here, I think I can do this quickly. Nope. Nope. There it is. So I have a Tether open here. So what you would do is you would have, like if I had multiple cameras attached here, you would have a check mark on all of them, and then all the cameras that you have there, and then all you have to do is just click record. That will trigger recording on all cameras that are selected. Automant, is it possible in a firmware update to close the shutter when we change lenses? I encourage you to read back through the chat. I had answered that already, but there are a lot of risks both ways with doing it. At the moment, it is not something that we're planning on doing. And I don't know whether or not it would be able to be a firmware update. But yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We ran a little bit longer than normal, which is awesome by me. I love these things. I love having these conversations, but I do also have other things I have to do today for work. So yeah, all of you, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for checking out the photos, the lens. Thank you so much to Sigma Corporation for sending us the 60 to 600 millimeter here. Know that this will not be the only this will not be the only conversation we have with this lens. We are going to be taking a little bit more and kind of getting more comfortable with it and checking out maybe more of the video side of how this lens can work. And then we will be live again next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Truthfully, I cannot remember what the topic is next week. It's been one of those kinds of weeks. And outside of that, everybody, hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Hope you have a great rest of your day. As I forgot to program my outro button. See you all next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Take care.